You might be wondering why a university president is out here talking to you about Star Wars, but most everybody at Austin Peay State University here knows that I'm a huge fan of the Star Wars franchise. And as the president of a sizable institution with nearly 10,000 students and about 1,600 faculty and staff, I think it's important for people in the campus community to know a little bit more about me personally, to know what makes me tick, to know how I think about things, to know my approach to the concepts of leadership. But first, a little bit about why I'm so enamored with the Star Wars franchise. The first film, titled simply Star Wars at the time, later amended to be Star Wars: A New Hope, came out in the summer of 1977. I was 6 years old. As you might imagine, that movie blew my mind. I saw it with a friend during the day and was so impressed that when my dad got home from work later that evening, I made him take me again. So I saw it twice in the same day. It also meant that, given the timing of it all, I literally grew up with the Star Wars franchise. The Empire Strikes Back, the second movie, came out in the summer of 1980 when I was 9, and The Return of the Jedi came out in the summer of 1983 when I was 12. So I literally grew up alongside the franchise, grew up in my most formative years watching these films. And so they made a huge impression upon me. And it's one that carries with me to this day. I've got Star Wars quotes in my office. I've got Star Wars books on the shelf. I've got a Star Wars Christmas tree. I've got Star Wars socks on. The original movie is deceptively simple. When you watch it as a kid, it's just a good guys versus bad guys battle, and that's about it, right? It is one that where George Lucas helpfully portrays the bad guys as faceless stormtroopers, right? And their leader, Darth Vader, is also in a mask. The only time you see the faces of bad guys is when some imperial bureaucrat is being portrayed, and it's kind of boring, right? It's actually helpful when the opposition is dehumanized. You can fight them more effectively because it prevents empathy. Of course, as a 6-year-old kid, I didn't really understand any of that, right? I just was enamored with the space battles and blaster fights and lightsaber duels. And so I missed some of the nuances of that initial film. In that initial film, the concept of the Force is introduced, right? You get a hint of the fact that there were battles between Jedi Knights and Dark Lords of the Sith. You get a hint that there is a light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force. You get a hint at some personal conflicts between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan Kenobi. But that's about it. You just get those hints. And as a 6-year-old, it's kind of tough to process all of that. Especially since I think in the original film, the Force is portrayed almost as if it's a party trick, right? You get Darth Vader choking some hapless imperial bureaucrat with the Force, and you get Obi-Wan Kenobi suggesting that these are not the droids you're looking for. Later on, the concept of the Force is more fully developed, right? In The Empire Strikes Back and The Return of the Jedi, we get a more full introduction to the Force and how our relationship with it can guide our path forward. The prequels then complete that introduction by helping us understand the real tension between the light side and the dark side, and how Anakin Skywalker, Luke's father, is seduced by the dark side and ultimately becomes Darth Vader. And so it's this introduction is completed in those 6 movies that I think leads us to the idea that we can gain leadership lessons out of thinking about the concept of the Force as it's portrayed in the Star Wars franchise. And this is because the Force is complicated, right? There's there's a difficult tension that you have to navigate between good and bad, the light side and the dark side. There is the understanding that the use of the Force is a learned skill, not some innate superpower. And therefore it is human in nature, right? It's connected to your emotions, your dispositions. Using the Force effectively, of course, is a skill that you have to learn, but it is also connected to your personal human characteristics. And so that's why I think there are so many people who think about the Force and how you might apply it to leadership lessons in the current day. I'm not the first to think about this, right? There's all sorts of books that have been written about it. This is a good one that I've engaged with that explores how we can use a concept in popular in popular media and apply it to real life leadership lessons in the current day. And so let's start with some leadership concepts. Let's talk about mentorship, lifting people up. Mentorship in the Star Wars franchise is integral to those films, right? You've got Jedi Knights that are always guiding and teaching and mentoring young Padawans, right? Who are learning the ways of the Force, right? So the concept of mentorship is baked in to the Star Wars franchise. The concept of mentorship is also critical to understanding effective leadership and organizational effectiveness. And this is because leadership, like the Force, is a learned skill. Good leaders are aware of their surroundings. They're watching and learning all the time. They've learned lessons along the way. And they've always had at least one influential person, a mentor, in their life. When Luke arrived on Dagobah, and I'm getting really Star Wars nerdy here, but bear with me. When Luke arrives on Dagobah to meet Yoda for the first time, right? He arrives with some rudimentary ability to use the Force, but he clearly didn't understand it. And so when he began his training with Yoda, he was whiny because it was hard. He failed more often than he succeeded, and this made him frustrated and impatient and even more whiny. I mean, Luke on Dagobah was like insufferable, right? And it led him to make some half efforts, right? Well, I guess I'll try to lift my X-Wing out of the swamp. And that led Yoda to say, I think my favorite quote of all of the films, try not, do, or do not. There is no try, right? Eventually, Luke, through persistent studying and persistent learning, becomes a Jedi Knight. And so in this way, I think we can understand another leadership lesson. Leaders, good leaders, are always interested in self-improvement. They're always trying to get advice and guidance so that they may become more effective. And since leadership is learned, good leaders, like good students, soak up every lesson they can. Jedi Knights and leaders are not developed overnight. It takes persistence and patience. It takes a willingness to be coachable. It takes a willingness to be teachable. It takes a willingness to listen to your mentor. Luke listens to Yoda. And it takes a very long time, but he listens and studies, becomes a powerful Jedi Knight. Anakin Skywalker, on the other hand, is impatient, frustrated, and doesn't listen to Obi-Wan Kenobi, falls to the dark side, and becomes Darth Vader. And so I think the tension between the light side of the Force and the dark side of the Force can help us understand the argument that, in the words of Lord Acton, power is to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's clear that in Anakin's selfish pursuit of power, he was seduced by the dark side. He was seduced by corruption. He was in search of power to save his wife, Padme's life. She was going to die. A wife, incidentally, that he was not supposed to have. Right? As a Jedi, the Jedi Code says he was not supposed to get married. So you have this confluence of selfishness in him. He's broken the Jedi Code, he's lied about it, and now he is in search of power for personal reasons. And it is through that selfish pursuit of power that he is seduced by the dark side and fails. Leadership requires sacrifice. Jedi, when they are young, are separated from their family, and they simplify their lives so that they may focus on others around them. Leadership is best done when it is in service of others, when it is done in the pursuit of a greater good, when it is done to uplift the community around you. And this is why, of all of the types of leadership, all of the models that we have to understand effective leadership, I think the servant leader model is the most well understood, the most popular, and I think the best way to lead. But leading in this way is not easy. Effective leaders, effective servant leaders, spend long, stressful hours thinking about problems to solve. They surrender their schedule and their calendars to others, and they're no longer in control of their daily lives. They have to solve problems and make decisions that are difficult and that are going to be controversial. And it is trying sometimes to continue to work on the behalf of others instead of you or your family. And it is sometimes exhausting to spend so much time and energy working for the community rather than for your family. But these are sacrifices that good leaders are willing to make. These are also sacrifices, though, that are sometimes too much for people. They wear people out. The temptation of the dark side is always there. And so we build up sometimes safeguards against the corruptive temptations of the dark side. This is why in my home discipline of public administration, we have theories and arguments that say that civil servants should be well paid and treated well, so that they might more easily resist the temptations of bribery and other forms of corruption in the public sector. This is why we have sunshine laws, Freedom of Information Acts, and the expectation that government business is conducted out in the open so that everybody may see it, that everybody may participate in it. The Dark Lords of the Sith want to rule the galaxy with an iron fist. They want power for its own sake. They want power for their own personal reasons and personal uses. They operate in the shadows because they don't want their corruption to be revealed. The Jedi Knights, on the other hand, operate in the open. They deliberate. They exchange ideas. And when it comes time to making a decision, they take an open vote. And so this tension between the light side of the Force and dark side of the Force, I think, is a good metaphor for my final point. And that is, good leaders seek to empower those around them. They find ways to provide resources, information, and authority to members of their team so that they may go out and those resources, take that authority, and make good, creative decisions to solve problems, to take advantage of opportunities, right? It is this empowering, almost liberating approach to leadership that maximizes organizational effectiveness, because talented members of your team will thrive in an environment like that when they are given the resources they need to do their job and the authority to make decisions about how those resources are going to be used. This requires leaders to be transparent, to be communicative, to be clear about what the organizational goals are, what the roles and responsibilities are for everybody. And it requires leaders to trust their team. so that work and authority, power, may be delegated to those teammates. This creates that collaborative environment that produces critical thinking, creativity, and innovative solutions. Leaders who have been seduced by the dark side, on the other hand, use power and fear to force people to do things, to force compliance. You see this in one of the very early scenes in the original movie, way back in 1977. The Emperor has just dissolved the Imperial Senate, and the bureaucrats on the Death Star are worried that this is going to fragment the galaxy, making things harder to control. In comes an Imperial officer, Grand Moff Tarkin, and he suggests that they don't have to worry about it. That literally, the quote is, fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of being obliterated by the Death Star will force all of the planets to bend to the Emperor's will, whether they like it or not. Throughout the franchise, we see Darth Vader choking, sometimes choking to death, a variety of Imperial officers who failed him in some way. And this might create some short-term compliance, out of sheer terror, perhaps, if nothing else. But at the expense of organizational performance. And this is because nobody is going to think outside the box, think creatively, think energetically, think in new ways if your neck is literally on the line. And you see this ultimately in the Empire as an institution, right? The Empire itself is clearly uninspired, it's clumsy, and ultimately not able to withstand a creative and motivated rebellion. I mean, after all, an entire legion of stormtroopers is defeated on Endor by a bunch of little furry Ewoks. In the throne room scene of the Return of the Jedi, there's an exchange between Luke and the Emperor. Luke criticizes the Emperor's overconfidence, and the Emperor, in turn, criticizes Luke's faith in his friends. This, I think, sums things up. Good leaders have faith in their friends. They have faith in their team. They trust their team. They're willing to empower their team so that you maximize the number of people doing good work on behalf of that greater good, on behalf of that community. Leaders who've been seduced by the dark side, on the other hand, use power to create a culture of fear, to make sure that people obey orders and do nothing else, to force compliance, to get people to do things that they otherwise wouldn't ever do. And this culture of fear is a culture of failure. Yoda in The Phantom Menace sums it up. He says, fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. Good leaders know that the temptation of the dark side is always there. So let's all make sure that we continue to face towards the light. Thank you.